And a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on i24 News. The headlines this hour. Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah sign a unity deal in Beijing, but members of both groups tell i24 News the agreement is meaningless. UAE hosted a secret meeting of Israelis and Americans in Dubai last week to talk about potential solutions for Gaza. And Iraq pushes for the US to withdraw all of its troops by September of next year. This despite concerns that ISIS is resurgent. First, a Chinese brokered deal between Fatah and Hamas is meaningless, according to sources in the Palestinian factions who spoke separately to i24 News. The two signed an agreement in Beijing today aimed at ending years of bitter division. But a number of similar reconciliation deals have all failed in the past. Israel's foreign minister said the deal was proof that the Palestinian Authority embraces terror. Robert Swift has the story.
Following 3 days of talks, 14 Palestinian factions signed a document, ostensibly moving them closer to a unified front. China's Foreign Affairs Ministry hosted the negotiations.
China always supports the just cause of the Palestinian people in restoring their legitimate national rights, supports all Palestinian factions in achieving reconciliation through dialogue, and supports Palestine in achieving unification and independent statehood.
The two leading factions, the fierce rivals Hamas and Fatah, have tried and failed to reconcile multiple times over the past 2 decades. The two have been bitterly divided since Hamas won Palestinian elections in 2006 and then violently expelled Fatah from Gaza a year later.
After 21 years of humiliation and contempt for each other, enough is enough. Everyone has to seek reconciliation. Everyone must see these children. We demand that China not let Fatah and Hamas leave until true reconciliation is achieved.
But Beijing's involvement may alter the equation, especially following a thawing of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia that took place last year under China's patronage. The rising global power is attempting to present itself as an alternative and less biased peace broker to the United States.
We hope that through these Chinese efforts to bring together Palestinian factions, especially Fatah and Hamas, an agreement will be reached to end the political division, especially during this unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe.
Israel, for its part, often points to disunity between Palestinian factions as a reason not to engage in negotiations, but also criticizes these same groups if unity with Hamas is floated. Instead of rejecting terrorism, Mahmoud Abbas embraces the murderers and rapists of Hamas, revealing his true face. In reality, this won't happen because Hamas's rule will be crushed, and Abbas will be watching Gaza from afar. Such was the response from Foreign Affairs Minister Israel Katz following the news from Beijing.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Professor Uzi Rabi is the director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East Studies and a senior researcher at the Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. And so both Hamas and Fatah members have told us here at i24 News that that agreement they just signed in Beijing, you know, intentions are good, but essentially it's meaningless.
Yes, in practice, actually, this, at least for the meantime, it means nothing. I would actually pay attention to two main things here. The first of which is the Chinese involvement. This is something that we had seen actually when it came to be seen in kind of an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, where the animosity is very, very deep and long. This is exactly actually the same case, because we do remember what happened in 2006-7, where Fatah and Hamas actually got into sort of a bloodshed about the control or around the control in Gaza. I think that what the Chinese are trying to do here is just to come up with kind of a show or performance as if they are a successful interlocutor to be used actually.
Just the fact of hosting the two sides makes you look as though you're doing
hosting
something.
The two sides actually maybe coming as kind of a counterbalance to the United States in a way, especially as in the United States the situation, at least internally, is very, very fragile. But let's just talk about our field. I mean, in practice, this is something that can't work because of two things. Israel actually won't let Hamas becoming a Trojan horse in Gaza and capitalize on that kind of an agreement to become kind of a Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is exactly what Hezbollah did in Lebanon. Not in the front, but actually the second seat. But we know basically this is kind of a thing that Israel won't allow itself to happen in Gaza. And the second thing is Fatah, which on the one hand is trying actually to show that he is very, very ready and open for sort of a rapprochement with Hamas. But in practice, actually, I'm pretty sure about that. They are praying that Israel would remain strict in its bid to destroy Hamas, because this is the real rival of Fatah, and Fatah would like actually to be in Gaza, but only after Hamas has been smashed. And this is the situation.
All right, Professor Rabi, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, it is being hailed as the latest big Middle East policy win for Beijing. There's been no reaction of the news of that agreement from the United States. So what exactly does China get from hosting these talks? Well, joining me now, Karis Witte is the founder and executive director of the Signal Group. Thank you very much for being with us, Karis. So from Algeria to Egypt, numerous Arab countries have hosted Hamas and Fatah. No one has managed to get a breakthrough. Why do the Chinese think it would be different for them?
China is the real beneficiary because it can bring them together. It is successful on its invitations. It brought Israel and the Palestinian Authority together, not official representatives on the Israel side, but it brought them together in years gone by. And you already discussed the Iran-Saudi rapprochement, which when I was in Beijing last month, Chinese officials admitted that they were actually just the facilitators. They didn't really do the mediation, but they enjoyed the PR benefit and the image bolstering that it gave them for being the broker, for being the umbrella.
Where is it getting that PR? Where is its image improving? Where in the world? Which countries are impressed by China's mediation?
Global South. We're talking about the developing world, which China claims to be the leader, although China is the second largest economy of the world and is a leader in many important advanced technologies, for example, electric vehicles that we've been hearing so much about. But it calls itself the leader of the Global South. That's where the numbers are. If you want to have votes in the United Nations, you go to the Global South, around 130 countries. And these are the ones that are cheering China for its success, both with Saudi Arabia and Iran, and now with a so-called success because a declaration was signed. There was some kind of a document, albeit limited, and as you just heard, probably carries no weight, but all over the media is already headlines talking about China creating peace, China bringing the two sides together, China getting the Palestinians to agree to a joint plan for a state, et cetera, et cetera. So
China looking like the responsible adult in the room, trying to get people to talk to each other. And this is a significant shift, isn't it? Because over the years, China's foreign policy stance has been, we don't interfere in other people's affairs, don't interfere in ours. Is this a sign that Beijing is now willing to take a more hands-on role in the Middle East?
That's the point. It is not taking a hands-on role. And it will still say that it's not interfering in other countries' internal affairs. It's saying that when we have two willing partners who will want to already come together, we'll provide the framework, we'll create the table, we'll invite them and host them. So I wouldn't say that it's any kind of major change in that way, but it is a tool for China to advance its own interests. For example, in the Chinese statements, it's talking about how this is part of the Global Security Initiative. That's China, one of China's suite of 3 initiatives to reshape global governance, according to President Xi Jinping. So it's using this declaration as another proof of its successful global security initiative, which Wang Yi, the leading diplomat of China, has said should become the security architecture for the Middle East. However, we've heard the UAE already talking about the fact that it does not want Hamas in that discussion you're going to have about the day after. If the UAE comes in, it doesn't want to see Hamas there. Fatah doesn't want to see Hamas there. Israel doesn't want to see Hamas there. But China is supporting Hamas and putting it front and center. So this is where the real interference does come. It's interfering in Israel's domestic affairs.
And Carice, just briefly, could this backfire for the Chinese? Because they do have their own issues with Islamists, according to them anyway. I mean, why would they want to associate with a group like Hamas?
China has its own version of how it manages its domestic Muslim population. As you've heard and discussed on this news broadcast, it works in a very different way, and it does not see any contradiction between supporting Hamas on the one hand, or Taliban, etc., and how it manages its own domestic Muslim population, which is with quite a strong hand.
Carice Whitty at the Signal Group, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as China looks to make its mark on post-war Gaza, there are reports of a secret meeting that took place in Dubai on the same issue a week ago. According to Axios, the UAE's Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed hosted Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer and White House Special Envoy Brett McGurk. And a day before that meeting, the Emirati envoy to the United Nations, Lana Nuseibeh, spoke to the Financial Times. She said the UAE would be willing to take part in a temporary force to help run Gaza. We'll talk more about that. Still with me in the studio, Professor Uzi Rabi, and we're also joined on the line by independent commentator and writer Dr. Nasir Al-Omari. Thank you very much for being with us, Nasir. Good to see you. So it seems that the UAE is willing to step up and take a role in managing Gaza. This would come with enormous risks, though, wouldn't it? What is the upside for Abu Dhabi?
Well, thank you for having me. Abu Dhabi doesn't like what's happening in Gaza. They think it's destructive to the Palestinians, and they believe that the U.S. and Israel can move in a different direction. However, they're also weary that Hamas coming out of this unscathed or coming out as a political entity proves that resistance and fighting Israel and the United States actually works. And the United Arab Emirates doesn't accept the Iran-Hamas Muslim Brotherhood line. So while they want to help the Palestinians, they also want to make sure that Hamas does not declare victory and comes out as having achieved something, in contrast to Arab regimes who are friendly to Israel and the United States, but have been unable to stop this war. So they play a delicate role. They want to help the Palestinians, but they don't want Hamas. And the whole framework of thinking right now that fighting Israel actually works and yields results.
How will that work, Uzi Rabi? Because the polls show consistently that Hamas enjoys the most support still among the Palestinians. So the UAE want to help the Palestinians, but they don't want to help Hamas.
First of all, there is a common denominator between Israel, United Arab Emirates, United States, and some other Arab states friendly to Israel in a way. All of them would like actually to get rid of Hamas. Hamas is part and parcel of what they call the Muqawama axis. This is a philosophy by which states like United Arab Emirates or even Saudi Arabia are being considered as traitors when it comes to the Arab or Muslim cause by actually aligning themselves with the United States. So basically, we have kind of a big thing here. There is a precondition. Now, we could actually have different views when it comes to the UAE, Israel, and the US, what sort of day after we're going to have here. But everybody is agreeing that the precondition is Hamas out of the game. Only once Hamas is something to be related to the history, then actually we're going to have all these discussions, at times disagreement, of what should be actually the most effective course to be taken in order to create a different Gaza. But if we are going to get there, we are in a good shape. I think that this is a problem of tactics. Strategy is basically the most important thing, and the United Arab Emirates, like the United States, like Israel, and like many others, would like actually to see Hamas out of the picture. Then we can start actually thinking positively about the day after in Gaza.
Okay, all right, Nasser, do you agree with that? And tell me, I mean, would the Palestinians ever accept a foreign force ruling over them, even an Arab force? And where do Egypt and Jordan stand, two other countries which have high stakes in what happens in Gaza?
Well, I think Hamas will not accept a replacement, although they sound sometimes like they might accept some form of entity to govern. I think any entity that will come in might be a threat to Hamas itself, since it has lost its control over Gaza. So I agree that it's a matter of tactics, but I think Iran and Hamas have managed to hijack the public opinion in the Palestinian street and in the Arab world by saying that all these peace initiatives, all this friendliness to Israel and normalization has not actually produced any results. And that is a very strong point that many Palestinians have come to accept. They say there is no Palestinian state, there is no movement toward peace, so fighting is the only way forward, and that is very dangerous. I think and countries like Jordan and the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, are afraid that Iran has actually taken over the whole Palestinian cause by advancing that thinking. And that's why I think it's not just a matter of tactics. I think it's also a matter of decision making on the part of the Israeli government to deal with this loss of hearts and minds. So there has to be a change in policy in order to strengthen these Arab regimes and the moderate Palestinians who actually believe that the only realistic way forward with Israel is to have some type of a peace process.
All right, and Uzi, Nasser makes a fair point there. You know, the diplomacy, the Abraham Accords and all the rest of it have not brought anything for the Palestinians. Hamas arguably at least got them back on the world agenda.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Listen, I mean, education in Gaza, even in Jordan and Egypt, for decades, have been based on vitriolic criticism against Israel and its very, very existence. We can't actually have kind of hearts and minds from today to tomorrow. It's a very long process.
It's a generational process.
Yeah, it's a generational thing, and we have to deal with that prudently. We are in the Middle East. We have seen the Americans in Afghanistan and Iraq coming with the day after. They would like to have kind of a quick solution. This is not the way to do that. United Arab Emirates by itself and Saudi Arabia, they implemented a program of de-radicalization, and this is still in the going, and my colleague definitely knows about that. So let's be very patient. We shall be united in our actually thought to create a different Gaza, but this is a long process, and if we are going to be very, very careful and prudent while dealing with that, we're gonna get there actually with the passage of time. I do agree when when I said tactics, I talked about the first stage. Of course, thereafter, everybody could bring in his thought. We're going to sit together. And basically, I do see kind of collaboration between Arab states, Palestinian, let us say, I won't say Palestinian Authority necessarily, but Palestinian circles. We can sit together and create something that in the long run would be very, very effective for Gaza and the Middle East as a whole.
Do you agree with that, Nasir? Do you think the Americans, the international community, are trying to rush things when it comes to the Palestinians? Or do you think that, understandably, the Palestinians are themselves out of patience?
Well, there are no direct and immediate solutions. I agree there is a war going on right now. I also agree that de-radicalization is a way to move forward toward peace. However, what's happening on the ground is not de-radicalization right now. What is happening is actually getting more and more Palestinians, according to polls, to actually embrace Hamas and Iran. So de-radicalization in countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia was accompanied by economic reform, by educating people. And I'm not sure that what's happening right now among the Palestinians is anything like this. So, the political decisions lead to a change in the environment, and that leads to change of hearts and mind. Yet, it's a long process, but that's the only way forward. And I don't see any other way to stabilize the region without that change of hearts and minds.
It is a fascinating discussion. I wish we could continue, but we'll have to leave it there. Dr. Nasir Al-Amari and Professor Uzi Rabi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, meanwhile, an Israeli drone strike killed 2 senior terror operatives in the West Bank today. Emma Siegel has this report.
Scenes of destruction following an Israeli drone strike in the West Bank city of Tulkarem. The strike targeted 2 senior terror operatives, Ashraf Nafeh, the head of Hamas in Tulkarem, and Mohammed Abu Abdo, the head of Fatah-linked Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in the same city. The IDF says that Nafeh was responsible for preparing and planting explosive devices to be detonated against Israeli troops, as well as being involved in recruiting Hamas operatives. While Abu Abdo was involved in shooting attacks and raising money for the terror activities in Tulkarem. The joint counter-terror operation carried out by the IDF, Shin Bet, and Israeli border police used a ruse to draw the terrorists to an open area where they could be targeted by the strike. Violence erupted on the streets of Tulkarem during the raid. Palestinian media reports that 5 were killed in the clashes. Videos circulating on social media show one of the operatives killed was an armed female combatant dressed as a medic. The IDF shot several gunmen in the early morning gunfight and destroyed explosive devices planted under roads in the city. The IDF says that it has carried out more than 50 airstrikes in the West Bank over the course of the last 9 months, as violence in the region has risen steadily since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington, D.C., where he's been meeting with some of the families of the hostages still being held in Gaza. Netanyahu said a deal to free them could be near. Our Sarah Martinez has the story.
It was supposed to be the speech where Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu makes his case to the American public, an unprecedented 4th address to Congress by a foreign leader to convince a bipartisan audience to continue its support of Israel at a time when the war in Gaza has caused growing backlash from the left. The premier insisted on flying to Washington despite anger from the hostage families that now is not the time, as negotiators say a hostage release deal is within reach.
We are determined to bring them all back. The conditions to bring them back are ripening for the simple reason that we are putting very, very strong pressure on Hamas, and we are seeing a certain change. And I think this change will grow, and we intend to do it. This is a war goal. This is an important visit that will give us an opportunity to bring to the representatives of the American people as well as the American people the importance of their support in the efforts we are making, together with them, to bring about the release of all the hostages, both the living and the dead.
The whole world had its eyes on Netanyahu. What will he say? Will he announce a ceasefire hostage deal? But then came Biden's shock announcement. He's dropping out of the presidential race, pulling the rug from underneath Netanyahu and removing all momentum ahead of his trip to the U.S. His visit was immediately relegated to an afterthought after weeks and months of buildup. Netanyahu is now forced to reevaluate his political game as he lands in Washington. The pressure is on as he prepares to take the podium on Wednesday. The hostage families are pushing to secure a deal to release their loved ones, meeting with Netanyahu in Washington and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the White House on Monday.
The time is now. There is no more time for delays. There's no more time for positioning, for jockeying. At this moment, what is demanded for the well-being of Israel, of our loved ones, and for the people of Gaza is for two leaders, Yahya Sinwar on Hamas' side and Benjamin Netanyahu on Israel's side, to show true leadership, to show that the sanctity of their own people is what's paramount.
If this deal doesn't start, if the process doesn't start, it will be seen as a failure.
Security has been beefed up with mass anti-Israel protests expected around the city. Prominent Democrats are already saying they will boycott the speech, and some progressives think the Squad are rumored to be planning protests from the floor. Vice President Kamala Harris will also skip the event, but plans on meeting Netanyahu separately this week. A highly charged meeting between Netanyahu and Biden now appears back on track after the president was diagnosed with COVID-19, with U.S. officials saying a sit-down between the pair is now expected for Thursday. But still, no final word from the White House. Also still awaiting confirmation is a meeting with Donald Trump. At a challenging time for the U.S.-Israel relationship, Netanyahu may have been hoping his visit to Washington would help strengthen those strained ties. But America's attention is elsewhere this week, the November elections.
Time for a short break. When we come back, Yemen's Houthis have dismissed Israel's first ever attack on the country. They say they will not be deterred and will continue to attack. More on that next. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back. Yemen's Houthis have shrugged off Israel's first ever direct strike on the country, retaliation for a deadly drone attack on Tel Aviv last week. The Israeli Air Force destroyed Yemen's port of Hodeidah, but the Iranian-backed group says it will not be deterred from launching further attacks on Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has this report.
Yemen's Hodeidah port continues to burn 72 hours after Israel's retaliatory strike on Houthi-controlled sites. And the Iranian-backed terror group is vowing to expand their strikes against Israel.
Israel's aggression will not benefit it at all. It will not provide it with deterrence, nor will it prevent the operations carried out by the Houthi army in support of the Palestinian people. Nor will it prevent us from continuing the fifth stage of escalation against the Israeli enemy.
This so-called fifth stage of the Houthis' operation will reportedly include surprise strikes on areas that have not yet been targeted. The Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper, which is affiliated with Hezbollah, claims the Houthis are planning to target Israel's offshore gas fields and energy sites. Meanwhile, the Houthis published footage of what they claim is the launch of their new Yafa drone, which penetrated Israel's air defenses and killed an Israeli in Tel Aviv on Friday. The show of force comes as the Houthis announced reaching an agreement with the Saudis aimed at de-escalating tensions. Earlier this month, the Houthis' leader threatened to strike the Saudis, accusing Riyadh of acting in the service of America and Israel.
The Saudis must realize that we can never remain silent regarding such reckless, foolish, and stupid steps. They must stop this wrong path, or else we will respond everything in equal measure. The Riyadh airport with the Sana'a airport, banks with banks, and ports with port.
According to the agreement, the sides agreed on a series of financial steps, including canceling steps against Yemeni banks, proving once again that the Houthis get what they want, through threats of violence.
And amid the threats from Iran's proxies in Yemen and also in Iraq, we're moving now to northern Israel, where its Lebanese proxy Hezbollah continues to fire missiles into Israel's northern communities. Our Balech Sledin is up in northern Israel with the latest for us now. Balech, what's happening?
Yes, half an hour ago, the sirens went off in Kiryat Shmona for the second time in the past hour. About 10 rockets were fired from south of Lebanon toward that Israeli town. Also, earlier in the day, we've heard the sirens there. The target was Bet Hillel. Actually, none of the attacks has caused any casualties from what we understand, but damage was caused, and fire also broke in some areas, specifically in the western Galilee, when 4 drones were fired from south of Lebanon. Some of them were intercepted by the Israeli air defense forces, but others landed in open areas and caused fire there. Hezbollah took responsibility 6 times until now for their attacks. This is coming after 2 assassinations targeting Hezbollah militants in the south of Lebanon, one in Shakra, the other one in other town in that area. According to the reports from there, the second assassination did hit a target, but also hit a mosque there in that same town, and Hezbollah is responding to that attack because of the hit that also reached that mosque in southern Lebanon. And a security assessment a couple of hours ago by the IDF told the residents here in the north, not only in the towns that are very close to the border and those that were evacuated, but also other 8 towns that haven't been evacuated, to stay beside bomb shelters, to stay beside safe areas. Apparently, because of the escalation, because of these assassinations, the IDF thinks that Hezbollah will retaliate, and we're seeing it happening right now. But again, until now, no casualties, only damage has been caused.
Balech, thank you very much indeed. Balech Sledin there up in the north of Israel. Well, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran is with me in the studio now. So, as we just heard, attacks continue from the Lebanese group Hezbollah, attacks from the Houthis, they're undeterred. Groups in Iraq and Syria are also coordinating more effectively to attack Israel. I mean, how can Israel restore its deterrence?
Well, the same way that its enemies are choosing to attack Israel, Israel needs to work with allies to try and not necessarily form, but be part of a coalition that we saw work together back in April when the Iranians, as well as the Houthis in Yemen and the Iraqis, all launched drones and missiles together. So that those were thwarted by a coalition of the United States and also Jordanian forces. That's, what Israel, if you look at Israel's threats against the Joint Axis, it needs to kind of fight fire with fire. But if we're looking at that Al-Akhbar report that was cited earlier, basically in which the Houthis say they're going to expand their strikes against Israel to include also offshore gas rigs. So in that report, they also say that these further strikes will include more cooperation between the different proxies. Now, we have seen over the past, I think, 2 or 3 months, increase in joint strikes by the Houthis in Yemen and pro-Iranian militia in Iraq. They claim to even launch simultaneously, and we saw back on Friday night, shortly after the Houthi drone that did manage to penetrate Israel's defenses, there was an Iraqi missile that was downed, or Iraqi drone that was down right before. So we are seeing that the Iranian proxies are working more and more in tandem. They're threatening to do that more, to increase that. And so Israel really needs to look at how it can not only protect itself, not only by itself, but also how can it perhaps go on the offensive, and it needs to do that as part of a coalition.
And that, of course, is affected by what's going on in Washington right now. Ariel, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Ariel Osirand there. Well, Iran has seized an oil tanker that was destined for the UAE. The Togo-flagged ship was intercepted carrying 1,500 tons of marine gas. That's according to the British security firm Ambrey. The vessel had loaded marine gas off the coast of Iraq and was on its way to the UAE's Sharjah port. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Norman Rule. He's a veteran of the CIA's managing programs on Iran and the Middle East, and is now a senior advisor at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Good to see you again, Norman. Thank you for joining us. Is this the first time Iran has directly targeted an Emirati ship, and what might be the consequences of that?
Good evening to you and to your viewers. This is not the first time that Iran has seized a small smuggling vessel. Many of these vessels do end up at refineries in the Emirates. This is not a political action or a military action. We're unlikely to see any significant escalation of tensions between the Emirates and Iran because of this issue. However, it does underscore that Iran does seize ships in the Gulf and will continue to do so. And this will, of course, cause complications for Gulf actors as they think about their defense of their own shipping.
And of course, the focus has been very much on Yemen's Houthis of late and the disruption that they are causing to global shipping. Has Iran kind of stepped off the gas, if you like, when it comes to attacking ships?
Iran's seizures of vessels has been fairly steady over the years. It's the significant increase through the Houthis, which is consistent with Iran's way of using third actors to, in essence, conduct its own operations, because Iran escapes any international response. The Houthi actions are extraordinary by any measure. They touch the entire global economy in a way that has never been achieved by Iran in the past. Iran's own actions in the Gulf don't do this, but Iran is able to project power indirectly. It's able to attribute these actions to itself while denying any direct role.
So Iran's strategy of outsourcing the disruption of global shipping to the Houthis has worked pretty well. Israel, of course, just carried out a direct strike, its first direct strike on the port of Hodeidah in Yemen, a Houthi-controlled port. Why is there not a more robust response from the United States?
Well, the international community as a whole has performed poorly in responding against Iran for its outsourcing of terrorism, militia activity, seizures of vessels, hostage taking. Even the Gaza war itself is an example of Iran outsourcing violence through Hamas. And the international community's response has been consistent. They will take limited action against the individual or group directly involved in the activity and pretty much ignore Iran, which makes this a great strategy for Iran and one which it will continue. The Israeli actions against the Houthis were the most significant attack against the Houthis in response to their aggression over the last 9 months, and will cause the Houthis considerable pain because the strikes against fuel storage at Hodeidah will cost the Houthis a vast amount of money and will complicate their logistics operations. But the international community and the United States has not undertaken such actions. They have instead focused on attacks against military units involved in specific military strikes, and this pretty much leaves the Houthi and Iranian decision makers untouched.
We're seeing increasing coordination between Iran's proxies. We're also seeing increased coordination between Iran and Russia, and to the extent that they are providing Iran's proxies with military hardware. They said again today that they want to deepen their partnership with Iran even further. Is there anything the West can do about this relationship now?
Well, regarding Iran and its proxies, we should look at Sudan and East Africa as an area where Iran, the Houthis, and Palestinian militants will certainly aim to build an area of operational activity. And it's imperative that we do something about Iran's relationship with the Sudanese government, to which it supplies drones, as well as preventing Iran and its proxies from building that presence, because that would provide an arms shipment machine for Iran, not only against the Arabian Gulf, but Israel itself. Regarding Russia and Iran in terms of their navies, this is fairly low-level engagement. These are not impressive navies. Their operations involve target firing, some search and rescue. It's highly symbolic, but they have different doctrines, different operational goals. This is more of a political gesture than an actual increase of military capability.
Norman Rule, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you. Well, to the UAE now, which continues its long-standing policy of cracking down on groups linked to the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood. Last week, the UAE jailed 43 people to life in prison for conspiring to commit terrorist attacks. And a student who was in the country on a student visa was deported after he used his graduation ceremony to yell "Free Palestine" while wearing a keffiyeh. Students had been previously warned against doing that. Let's go to Abu Dhabi. We're joined by Luay Al-Sharif, peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Great to have you with us, Luay. So the UAE does get a lot of heat, it has to be said, for handing down these lengthy jail terms. But explain to us how this is part of their zero-tolerance policy when it comes to Islamist groups.
But just one thing to correct, Laura. 45 people were not sentenced to life in prison, only 3.
Apologies.
Yeah, the leaders of the riots, but others were sentenced to deportation. And this comes in aligned to the policy of the UAE that zero tolerance to those who, the rioters. Protests are not allowed in the UAE. Laura, this is the law of the country. And the president of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, made a very beautiful statement on X, urging everyone who's living in the UAE, those who choose the UAE as their home, to abide by its laws. And we really know that protests usually lead to riots, just like what happened with the Bengali groups that were doing this riots last week. So I want to say one thing, Laura. The laws of the UAE are not obscured, but they are not, how to say this, not so clear. They are so crystal when it comes to the security of the society. So everyone knew. And by the way, the public prosecutor, when he tweeted that and when he said that these kind of procedures were carried out, the people of the riots were warned, and they did not abide by the laws. So the UAE is a very tolerant country, but it has zero tolerance to those who seek riots on its soil.
What about the student, though, Luai? Why was it necessary to deport him just for showing his support for Gaza? I mean, this is something we've seen a lot of around the world. Was this disproportionate, do you think?
No one shows better support to Gaza and to the Gazans than the UAE. There is no Arab country that supported the people of Gaza, that built a field hospital in Gaza like the UAE. The humanitarian aid, the Operation Gallant Night that was launched by the UAE aided the people of Gaza, and the UAE cared about care about the people of Gaza more than anyone who would just throw political ideologies here and there. And the president of the UAE hosted 2,000 Palestinian children, especially from those who are suffering in Gaza. Now, as I told you, Laura, there are laws in the UAE that everyone is aware of. It's not a surprise. If you are in a graduation ceremony, you are not allowed to throw political ideologies, especially when it comes to incitement. The public prosecutor knows this very well, and the public prosecution deals with that, taking into consideration that there are 200 nationalities of different faiths in the UAE, and if you tolerate someone who would throw this political cry, you would open the space to others as well to do this, and that would destabilize the society. I know some people might think that like it's too much, but to the people living here, we are grateful to have these laws.
Okay, well, the Emiratis also have a strategy, don't they, Luai? They go after, they don't just wait until a plot is uncovered. They go actively after the funding and the promotion of terrorist groups like Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, and so forth. Do you think this is something that the West needs to pay more attention to?
Well, this is exactly the title of an article, Laura, by the Jewish News Syndicate, What Americans Need to Learn from the UAE. And I would add something, not only Americans, Europeans, and everyone need to learn this from the UAE, that you cut the funding, you stop you fight hate with laws and legislations, of course, but also with force. And unfortunately, as I told you, Laura, and as I say to my American and European friends, the freedom of speech and the freedom of so many freedoms are being abused by the extremists. And the Europeans and the Americans are not aware that these freedoms that they provide to those who don't appreciate these freedoms will be taken away from them as soon as they use it as a ladder to climb and get what they want and then throw the ladder away. So we are the people who know. So these legislations are harsh, but it's for the best of the society.
And yours is a country, of course, of many different nationalities who live and work side by side, many different cultures, and so forth. I want to go back to the Bangladeshi riots, because something similar happened in London, and there were hundreds of men on the streets of East London fighting, throwing missiles at police, starting fires, causing chaos. And sadly, in the West, people have become not used to, but, you know, these kind of mass protests, these disturbances are not uncommon. Do you think the West is kind of losing its way when it comes to protecting and prioritizing the safety and welfare of ordinary citizens?
I think so, and I think the West needs to learn from those who know. If the West got used to this or to these scenes, the UAE is not used to it and will not tolerate it and does not want it. The UAE is a haven for everyone to come, thrive, and prosper, and build a fortune and live in a happy life. And this is why the UAE is actually giving golden visas to so many investors, to so many scientists, so many people, that it is forming an environment that is inviting to people. No income tax. You see so many things the UAE is offering, but at the same time, the UAE is saying that, or the leadership is saying that these are our laws, abide by the laws. And who wouldn't abide by laws that would make them live a good living, a great living, honestly. So I unfortunately, Laura, I have to say this. Yeah, the West is losing it, and they need to know, or they must learn, that the freedom that they are giving to the extremists will backfire sooner or later. And I'm just saying this as someone who loves the West, who loves Europe, who loves America, but I'm telling them because many of them do not really want to listen. I hope they do before it's too late. It's not too late yet.
we hope so. Wise words as always, Luai. Thank you very much. Great to see you. Luai Al-Sharif there.
Thank you so much, Laura.
And now Ariel Osseran is here with me in the studio. And Luai is right, isn't he, when he says that the UAE has really been at the forefront of providing aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, and when you compare that to the scenes that we see in the United States, we see lots of, pro-Hamas, in many cases, demonstrations. In the UAE, they're just saying, no, I'm sorry, we will help the Palestinians, but we're not dealing with that.
Yeah, it wasn't just the UAE. The UAE and Qatar, you could say, were competing who's more pro-Palestinian, who can airdrop more aid. Exactly. That was my next completion. So we have seen a push by different Arab states, mainly from the Gulf, but not only, to show their support to the Palestinians, the Palestinian people, and also to discuss the day after. And this comes amid reporting by Axios that Israeli, American, and Emirati officials had this secret meeting in Abu Dhabi last week to discuss the day after regarding the situation in Gaza. I think it's unfortunate that in a reality post-Abraham Accords, a meeting like that between Israeli and Emirati officials has to be considered a secretive meeting. The same thing also happened in Egypt, but that you understand that more because the Egyptian public wouldn't.
There is a difference, isn't there, between the Arab countries that consistently and constantly criticize Israel, but they don't come up with any solutions, and then you've got a country like the UAE, which is trying to deal with the reality on the ground and come up with real concrete solutions that would make lives better for everyone.
Trying to balance public opinion and also their role in the Arab world. Also, according to this Axios report, they showed their willingness. They're the first country to show their willingness to participate in a peacekeeping force. The day after, the Jordanians said they will not be part of that. So indeed, the Emiratis indicating how much they're personally invested in the future of Gaza.
There's walking the walk and there's talking the talk, isn't there? Ariel, thank you very much. Ariel Osseran there.
Thanks.
Now, Iraq has begun discussions with the United States on a timetable for the withdrawal of US troops. Baghdad wants to begin the process in September and formally conclude it a year later. This amid concerns that ISIS is resurgent in both Iraq and in Syria. For more on that, we're joined by Scott Stewart. He's the Vice President of Intelligence at the group Torchstone Global. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Can you just lay out for us, what is the scale of US forces in Iraq right now? And why would a withdrawal take a full year? And also, is that a good idea for the United States right now?
Well, right now, basically, the Americans are in three separate bases, smaller bases. We're not talking, 2005, 2006 levels. There's probably, 900 or under 1,000 troops spread out. A base down by Baghdad. You have a base up in Anbar, and then a base up in Kurdistan. And the idea, the mission there is really to try to keep the pressure on the Islamic State and make sure that they don't have the opportunity to resurge again.
Well, that brings me on to my next question. Would a full withdrawal not just be a gift to ISIS and allow them to take over vast swathes of territory as they did back in 2014?
Yeah, we've seen this movie before, right? We had the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces in 2011, and we saw what that led to in 2013, 2014. And certainly that's the Americans' concern. The problem is, though, we have this issue of politics within the region and sectarian politics at that. So, there is a lot of pressure upon Iraq from the Shia within Iraq and, of course, their Iranian sponsors in order to push the Americans out. They also fear that America's presence there is kind of a counter to Iranian influence and power in Iraq. And so there's just tremendous pressure, again, by the Shia to push them out. And of course, that's what's led to problems in the past, right? It's that Shia resurgence, and it's basically the oppression that they place on the Sunnis that lead the Sunnis to see these extremists as being kind of their champions. And that's what definitely led to not only the emergence of al-Qaeda in Iraq, but then later the Islamic State in Iraq. And later we knew as ISIS.
Yeah, and of course the West had to expend significant resources in fighting ISIS. That allowed Iran to kind of expand its influence with its proxy groups across the region, and that's that's where we are now. But do you think that politically this is just the way the wind is blowing in the US? They don't want troops in the Middle East.
I think the Americans understand, at least, well, we do right now have to understand politically, there is kind of that isolationist bent within the Republican Party. But I think by and large, most Americans and most in the government understand that we need to have some presence in the region in order not only to make sure that Islamic State doesn't resurge again, and certainly we're seeing that happen right now, right? We're seeing an increase in attacks in Iraq, in Syria, in the region. So it's already started to increase. We want to make sure that it doesn't once again get blown out of proportion, and become a serious regional and transnational threat. But at the same time, the Americans also want to make sure that they keep an eye on Iran, on just the proxies and the pressure they're placing within the region with their irregular warfare, whether it's from Yemen all the way up through that circle, through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon.
Certainly a lot to deal with. Scott Stewart at Torchstone Global, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Stay with us. Caleb Ben-David is up next. Good night.
Our beloved region was 95% heaven before that fateful day. Then, in one piercing moment, horror and darkness took over our lives. But Jewish National Fund USA were here with us from day one, helping us to collect our pieces together. We choose life, and we will continue, always, to choose life together.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, i24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on i24 News.
Prime Minister Netanyahu prepares for his big speech to the U.S. Congress. With America focused on election politics, is anyone there paying attention? We'll go to Washington for the latest. Amid growing calls for a hostage deal, Arab families in Israel are also coping with the nightmare of having loved ones held captive in Gaza. We'll hear their story. And the Paris Olympics are set to begin under unprecedented security, with special concern for the Israeli athletes there. We'll take a closer look. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Kalev Ben-David. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C., preparing for his big speech tomorrow to a joint session of Congress. But is anyone there paying attention? Joe Biden's shock withdrawal from the 2024 presidential race has stolen attention away from the highly anticipated Netanyahu visit at a crucial time in U.S. relations, as the premier faces increasing pressure to make a hostage deal and wrap up the battle against Hamas. Netanyahu's face-to-face meeting with Biden has been pushed to Thursday as the president recovers from COVID. And a meeting set with Vice President Kamala Harris has now taken on increased importance. Sarah Martinez has more in this report.
It was supposed to be the speech where Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu makes his case to the American public, an unprecedented fourth address to Congress by a foreign leader to convince a bipartisan audience to continue its support of Israel at a time when the war in Gaza has caused growing backlash from the left. The premier insisted on flying to Washington despite anger from the hostage families that now is not the time, as negotiators say a hostage release deal is within reach.
We are determined to bring them all back. The conditions to bring them back are ripening, for the simple reason that we are putting very, very strong pressure on Hamas, and we are seeing a certain change. And I think this change will grow, and we intend to do it. This is a war goal. This is an important visit that will give us an opportunity to bring to the representatives of the American people, as well as the American people, the importance of their support in the efforts we are making, together with them, to bring about the release of all the hostages, both the living and the dead.
The whole world had its eyes on Netanyahu. What will he say? Will he announce a ceasefire hostage deal? But then came Biden's shock announcement. He's dropping out of the presidential race, pulling the rug from underneath Netanyahu and removing all momentum ahead of his trip to the U.S. His visit was immediately relegated to an afterthought after weeks and months of buildup. Netanyahu is now forced to reevaluate his political game as he lands in Washington. The pressure is on as he prepares to take the podium on Wednesday. The hostage families are pushing to secure a deal to release their loved ones, meeting with Netanyahu in Washington and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the White House on Monday.
The time is now. There is no more time for delays. There's no more time for positioning, for jockeying. At this moment, what is demanded for the well-being of Israel, of our loved ones, and for the people of Gaza is for two leaders, Yahya Sinwar on Hamas' side and Benjamin Netanyahu on Israel's side, to show true leadership, to show that the sanctity of their own people is what's paramount.
If this deal doesn't start, if the process doesn't start, it will be seen as a failure.
Security has been beefed up with mass anti-Israel protests expected around the city. Prominent Democrats are already saying they will boycott the speech, and some progressives think the Squad are rumored to be planning protests from the floor. Vice President Kamala Harris will also skip the event, but plans on meeting Netanyahu separately this week. A highly charged meeting between Netanyahu and Biden now appears back on track after the president was diagnosed with COVID-19, with U.S. officials saying a sit-down between the pair is now expected for Thursday. But still, no final word from the White House. Also still awaiting confirmation is a meeting with Donald Trump. At a challenging time for the U.S.-Israel relationship, Netanyahu may have been hoping his visit to Washington would help strengthen those strained ties. But America's attention is elsewhere this week, the November elections.
Let's go now to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, in Washington, D.C. And Mike, there in the Capitol. First, bring us up to date on Benjamin Netanyahu's day there in Washington. And, of course, what we can expect there on Capitol Hill, the Senate chamber, with Benjamin Netanyahu giving a speech under not quite the circumstances he anticipated.
Nothing about this trip has gone the way that Prime Minister Netanyahu anticipated. The Prime Minister's office put out a statement before Netanyahu's plane took off the other day that he would have a meeting with Joe Biden on Tuesday. Well, today's Tuesday. That meeting ain't happening. We are getting some reports, though, from other Israeli media, unconfirmed so far by the White House, that Biden and Netanyahu will be meeting at the White House on Thursday together with the family members of some of the abductees, which, if that was a ploy by Joe Biden, a brilliant maneuver on his part to avoid the photo opportunity with Netanyahu by itself, and instead to bring the family members in to pretty much up the pressure on Netanyahu, if you will. By the way, earlier today, the House Foreign Affairs Committee held a roundtable with the family members of hostages being held. Several family members pressuring the representatives of the House Foreign Affairs Committee to put pressure on Netanyahu to stop the war, at least temporarily, and bring back the hostages in exchange for the release of some security prisoners. There was a number of back and forth exchanges with some of the Congress members regarding that. But in terms of what to expect from the speech, well, Prime Minister Netanyahu is Prime Minister Netanyahu. We'll hear the usual rhetoric about the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the importance of the bipartisan nature of it, the fact that you got to kill the head of the snake, which is Iran, which is leading to all these regional problems. I think what the wild card is right now is whether Netanyahu will lay out the parameters for the end of the war, the parameters for a day-after scenario in the Gaza Strip, which is what a lot of, at least on the Democratic side, Congress members and senators want to hear. And until they hear, they're really reluctant to give Israel additional support at this point in time. And I think it will also be of note to hear the tone, the context, the nuance of Netanyahu's thanks or lack thereof, or anything in between, to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party for continuing to send weaponry to Israel, for continuing to support Israel to the extent that the party and that the president has. I think those are kind of the wild cards right now to look for tomorrow.
Right. But, Mike, the question is how Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to make headlines with these speeches, communicate direct to the public through the media, and how much coverage is this going to get? It could have been a leading story of the day. Now that's a little doubtful. We're hearing also some prominent figures will not be in the audience there on Capitol Hill. And again, the rest of his schedule also, one has to ask, will there be a meeting with Donald Trump, for example? How much time will he have with Kamala Harris and so forth?
Yeah, the Biden-Harris meeting, which, by the way, I think is more consequential at this point than a Biden-Netanyahu meeting. The Netanyahu-Harris meeting is still not scheduled yet. Harris will be out of town tomorrow during Netanyahu's speech, an event that was planned for quite some time, a meeting with a sorority up in Indianapolis. By the way, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party, also will be out campaigning tomorrow. There's no word yet on a meeting with Donald Trump. There was some talk within Netanyahu's circle that he would try to make a phone call to Trump, but that can be done from Israel. He doesn't need to be in America unless he wants to save on long-distance charges. So that's kind of falling by the wayside at this point in time, and especially with a potential White House meeting on Thursday, dragging out the trip even further to the weekend doesn't make a whole lot of sense anyway if he's trying to meet up with Trump here in the United States. So what's left at this point? Well, he's got a meeting today with the Evangelical Committee and the American Jewish Committee. He'll have the address to Congress tomorrow, a meeting with Biden likely on Thursday, and still the wild card whether he'll meet with Kamala Harris on Thursday at the White House.
All right, a lot of questions still surrounding the rest of this trip, but Prime Minister Netanyahu will get his say there from the podium in Capitol Hill tomorrow. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that. And now also joining us from Washington, D.C., from the Capitol, is Jonathan Dekel-Chen, the father of hostage Sagi Dekel-Chen, who's, Jonathan, as we saw just in the clip a few minutes ago, one of those who met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I want to hear your impressions of that meeting of the Prime Minister, Jonathan. And let me ask you about, we just heard this news of that some of the hostage families are going to also be meeting or be in that meeting with, at least part of it, with President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu on Thursday.
Well, I'll start from the end. I don't have confirmation of that.
Right. Okay.
If we will be meeting and in what forum. So you'll probably know that before I do. As far as the meeting went yesterday, it was a meeting of there were probably about 20 hostage families or representatives from 20 hostage families. And to be honest with you, it wasn't one of the low points for me since October 2nd, the Prime Minister. We were misinformed as to what it was going to be. The Prime Minister heard and wrote down our questions, and those who were not, his staunch supporters to begin with. He answered none of them, and instead launched into what I can only describe as an act of political theater for 15 minutes or so, telling us in great drama how hard he's been working at the hostage deal and how he's really the person who seems to understand, despite all facts to the contrary, he seems to be, in his telling of it, the person who understands the true security problem that Israel faces. This same man is responsible for just the monumental failure of Israel on October 7th. So, as I said, truly one of the low points for me, at least, since October 7th.
I mean, it's disappointing to hear that from you, Jonathan. I mean, it has been reported that the Prime Minister did say conditions are moving towards a deal. Did you leave? I know there was some that anticipated that you were going in that meeting to even hear about a hostage deal. What impression, beyond what you just said, did you get about the possibility within the next, let's say, couple of weeks or after the Prime Minister returns here that there could be a deal or that it would be close to a deal?
Well, I think what's important to note here is not what the Prime Minister says, because we've learned absolutely that is almost meaningless in this case. What we do know is from our meetings with U.S. officials, including head of the National Security Council, Jake Sullivan, just a couple of hours before that, as well as from all Israeli military intelligence officials, that the conditions are already right. The only thing that is lacking is the political will and courage on our Prime Minister's part to risk his own coalition government on behalf of the hostages, of ending this conflict, and thereby creating the space to deal with the actual existential challenges that Israel has. The army has already clearly stated, including our own defenses, Israeli defenses, that Hamas has been degraded to such a point where there is no reason to continue this bloodletting. The Prime Minister, for his own, evidently, domestic political reasons, simply refuses to accept that and instead continues on, evidently, buying more and more. Look, yesterday we were informed, all of us were informed, that 2 more hostages had died in captivity. One of them, Alex Vance, has been my friend for over 40 years. He is now the 7th, count them, 7th hostage from Nir Oz alone, from my kibbutz, that we know for a fact was alive when taken captive and has died in captivity. Some by friendly fire, Israeli friendly fire. Others, met some other fate. All of them murdered in one way or another. What are we waiting for? For them all to come home in caskets? We don't know how many more are still alive. We truly don't. But these delays, another week, and why is it the Prime Minister decided to send out our envoys only on Thursday? What was wrong with Monday? What's he waiting for? The only answer to this question is for his own political domestic needs. And it is an abominable thing. I'm an Israeli patriot. I've lived on the border with Gaza my entire adult life. This is a moment where he needs to decide, is he the leader of a country or just a third-rate politician focused on his own political survival?
All right, tough words to hear, but understandably from your position, Jonathan Dechelchen. We hope we get some good news about Sagi and, of course, all of the other hostages still in Gaza as soon as possible. And again, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us for more, we have Robert Silverman, a former U.S. diplomat and editor-in-chief, joining us from Malibu, California, and Ariel Oseran, of course, our Middle East correspondent. Ariel, first, I just want to ask you, following up on that interview with Jonathan Deckelchen. I mean, some of that, similar tones have been come out in some of the reporting today in the Israeli media about that meeting. But hearing that directly from one of the participants is quite striking.
Striking and heartbreaking that's the sentiment when relating to your head of state that is responsible for not only for the worst security catastrophe this country has known, but also responsible for bringing the hostages back. And obviously very difficult to hear such harsh words, obviously understandable under the circumstances. But if we look at how we got here and where we are currently placed, where you have pretty much the entire Israeli security establishment, all mediators saying that it's just up to Prime Minister Netanyahu, basically saying that all these additions that have been made in recent weeks regarding the Philadelphia axis and the permitting Gazans moving back up north, all that are obstacles that have been added following Hamas's agreement to the Biden proposal, which is based on an Israeli proposal. So the current situation is that Hamas and the mediators are waiting for Israel's official response on Israel's proposal. And so given that situation, it's very understandable to hear such harsh words and such a sentiment from the families of the hostages that are watching their leadership also go against each other. The military leadership with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the military leadership saying Israel can protect, the IDF can maintain Israel's security interests with the current deal that's on the table. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant from the Rafah crossing this evening saying the exact same thing. And so you have all security establishment on one side and the Prime Minister on the other. And for the Israeli public as a whole, but specifically the families of the hostages, it's a very difficult situation to be in.
Robert, I should have identified you early as editor-in-chief at Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, excuse me. You could weigh in on what we've just been discussing. I also want to ask you, the Prime Minister has other messages he wants to deliver in that address to Congress tomorrow about the need to totally defeat Hamas and the threat that Iran poses to the entire region is still a major issue. These are important messages, but given all that's happening politically in the U.S., is that going to resonate? Is anyone listening going to listen to these messages at this time?
Well, great question. I think some of us have been warning our Israeli government friends that the U.S. is in the midst of one of the more interesting political campaigns it's seen ever in the history, of the United States. So the timing is not great. The original plan was mid-June, and in retrospect, they should have held to the original plan, perhaps, to have this visit be in mid-June, because the later it goes into this political calendar in the U.S., the less attention it will go. I mean, today is going to be better than next week and next month during the Democratic convention. So it is what it is. Israel and the Prime Minister is responding to a U.S. invitation and is going to take the time he can, which is now. I'm a little bit disturbed by the political debate inside Israel, because it needs to be, I think, more focused on Hamas. And the reason Hamas is not going to deliver all of the hostages in any conceivable deal is it wants to survive this war. And if it does survive this war in any form, as a political entity, as a military entity, it will declare victory and will be seen as having won the war. So we have to understand that this is not just pressure on the Prime Minister, but the media, the Israeli media, also needs to keep the focus on Hamas, because after all, they're the ones who are torturing and holding the hostages. They're the ones who have vowed to do this again if they can. And their conditions are that they want to survive this war. They want the IDF to withdraw and without having completely dismantled Hamas. And so I understand any Prime Minister of Israel in this shoes, whether it's Netanyahu, and he has many critics, and I understand that, and it's a democracy, and that's fantastic. But any Israeli Prime Minister will want to have this security threat on the border 40 miles from downtown Tel Aviv eliminated, and it's not yet been eliminated.
Right, but I take your point, and these are legitimate points in theory, but you say the media, in part, the lobby for a deal now is being driven by the hostage families, as you can understand, and when you have conversations, as we just heard by Jonathan Deckelchen, it obviously, and let's keep in mind, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu who brought the families, some of the families to the United States. That's an important issue because it underscores the inhumanity of Hamas. Yeah. But at the same time, they are also, their primary concern, as they say, is let's free the hostages. We'll have to defeat Hamas down the road if that need be.
Well, and then, yes, listen, I'm glad you're giving a lot of airtime to the hostages' families, and all of us feel for them and want those hostages released as soon as possible. So, they have a very narrow focus, which the country itself also experiences. It's a lot of solidarity in Israel. That's one of the beautiful things about that country.
Right.
But there are other issues, and I think it's incumbent on the media to also note that if the IDF has to withdraw and, as you say, go back in, there will be more IDF soldiers killed in the going back in. There's no casualty-free scenario here. Okay. And we have to recognize that it's a war against a barbaric enemy, and the focus needs to be on that barbaric enemy and what it'll take to eliminate that threat.
Right.
And so, if the IDF is forced to withdraw, and Hamas survives the war, those won't be the last hostages that Israel will ever face. That I can promise you.
Right.
Because that's an Achilles heel, but Israel's a humane country. So release of the hostages is a super high priority. It's not the only priority.
Understood. And we do have, you're right, and those sentiments are voiced, for example, by family groups of soldiers serving currently in Gaza. Right. And, of course, we do have them and allow them to express those sentiments. And that does absolutely has to be kept in
we have to
mind.
reestablish deterrence in a very bad neighborhood. I'll just add one thing about a very disturbing thing, talking about deterrence in a very bad neighborhood. Yeah. Kamala Harris is not going to be present. She's the president. She presides over the Senate.
Correct.
In a typical joint session of Congress, you have sitting behind whoever is the speaker at the podium is the Speaker of the House on one side and the President of the Senate, which is the Vice President. She won't be there. That sends a very bad message to all of Israel's enemies about the distance she's creating between Israel and the United States.
Well, that's true. That's a legitimate point.
Talk about human life.
Right.
You can probably translate her failure to be at the joint session of Congress of an ally of the United States and wartime. Yeah. You can probably translate her failure to be there in terms of Israeli lives lost in the future.
That's a legitimate point. She does say she will meet privately with Benjamin Netanyahu, and as we also noted, the vice presidential candidate for the Republicans, Senator J.D. Vance, who would normally be there, will also not be in the chamber tomorrow. He's also out on the campaign trail.
Caleb.
No,
She's presiding over the Senate.
Absolutely, Robert, absolutely legitimate point. Robert Silverman, thank you so much for joining us again on I-24 News.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to Israel's north, where IDF air defense systems shot down several drones today that were launched by Hezbollah from South Lebanon. Some of those did get through and hit areas near Mount Meron and Kiryat Shmona. Some of those setting off blazes raging on this hot summer day. And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who's in northern Israel. And Balir, a hot day in a lot of ways there in northern Israel.
Yes, definitely. The temperature is not helping the firefighters deal with the fire that erupts every now and then, and in many locations in the Israeli north after drones or missiles hit open areas, or even parts of the interceptor missile hit the targets in the air. And it happened, of course, many times a day, just like every day in the past 9 or 10 months, actually. And And we're going back to that same equation of the tit for tat between Israel and Hezbollah. Today, 4 drones were fired at some military site. Hezbollah is saying that this is a new site that they target for the first time today. Apparently, some of these drones were intercepted. Others fell in open areas. Also in Kiryat Shmona, just a couple of hours ago, the sirens went off. A couple of times in the same hour, they tried to reach the military site in Bet Hillel and also in Margaliot. According to what the IDF is saying, that 15 rockets were fired from southern Lebanon. Some of them were intercepted again. Others fell in open areas. No reports of any casualties, neither in the western Galilee or in the upper Galilee, but Hezbollah is continuing their attacks. That's coming after 2 assassinations today, one in Shakra in southern Lebanon, the other one in another town in southern Lebanon. And according to Hezbollah, or reports there in Lebanon, they're saying that the missile that Israel fired, the Israeli drone fired, hit their target, but also hit the mosque there in that southern town. And because of that, they are retaliating today because of the importance of that. We know that Hezbollah wants to keep their picture as the protector of the south, the protector of the Shia minority in Lebanon. And every time that any civilian or any important religious symbol, just like a mosque, is hit, we see that some escalation is happening, and that's what happened today. But again, the usual tit for tat, although that we're talking about just days after this massive attack in El Hudaydah port in Yemen, and the possibility of coordination between the Houthis and Hezbollah, also the militias in Iraq, and target Israel.
Right. I'm just going to note that Hezbollah seems much less concerned with the mosques in the many Israeli Arab communities that they have been launching indiscriminate fire against since October. Balir Sladin there in northern Israel, thank you for that. And I'll ask Ariel Ostron to stay with us. We're going out for a brief break, but we will be back with lots more of the rundown.
Our beloved region was 95% heaven before that fateful day. Then, in one piercing moment, horror and darkness took over our lives. But Jewish National Fund USA were here with us from day one, helping us to collect our pieces together. We choose life, and we will continue, always, to choose life together.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
back to the rundown on I-24 News. Now, as the battle in Gaza perhaps is heading into a final phase, even a ceasefire, Palestinian factions, including Fatah and Hamas, signed an agreement in Beijing today aimed at, quote, ending division and strengthening Palestinian unity. Now, the reconciliation effort, engineered by China, seeks to create a framework for governing Gaza, but of course is unlikely to be welcomed by Israel. Our correspondent Robert Swift explains.
Following 3 days of talks, 14 Palestinian factions signed a document, ostensibly moving them closer to a unified front. China's Foreign Affairs Ministry hosted the negotiations.
China always supports the just cause of the Palestinian people in restoring their legitimate national rights, supports all Palestinian factions in achieving reconciliation through dialogue, and supports Palestine in achieving unification and independent statehood.
The two leading factions, the fierce rivals Hamas and Fatah, have tried and failed to reconcile multiple times over the past 2 decades. The two have been bitterly divided since Hamas won Palestinian elections in 2006 and then violently expelled Fatah from Gaza a year later.
After 21 years of humiliation and contempt for each other, enough is enough. Everyone has to seek reconciliation. Everyone must see these children. We demand that China not let Fatah and Hamas leave until true reconciliation is achieved.
But Beijing's involvement may alter the equation, especially following a thawing of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia that took place last year under China's patronage. The rising global power is attempting to present itself as an alternative and less biased peace broker to the United States.
We hope that through these Chinese efforts to bring together Palestinian factions, especially Fatah and Hamas, an agreement will be reached to end the political division, especially during this unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe.
Israel, for its part, often points to disunity between Palestinian factions as a reason not to engage in negotiations, but also criticizes these same groups if unity with Hamas is floated. Instead of rejecting terrorism, Mahmoud Abbas embraces the murderers and rapists of Hamas, revealing his true face. In reality, this won't happen because Hamas's rule will be crushed, and Abbas will be watching Gaza from afar. Such was the response from Foreign Affairs Minister Israel Katz following the news from Beijing.
And still with us in studio, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osron. Ariel, like that gentleman, I've been following and reporting on 21 years of efforts to get these unity agreements between Fatah and Hamas. The new element is China's deep involvement. Is that made a difference in really achieving something now?
Look, Kalev, a recommendation to you and your viewers, don't hold your breath for Palestinian reconciliation. That's a very important message, given that sources and senior members of both Hamas and Fatah who have spoken to me and to I-24 News editor in I-24 News International editor-in-chief Ali Waqid, they describe this agreement, this Chinese brokered agreement, as nothing more than meaningless, saying that, officially, obviously, both sides are praising this agreement, but senior members in both parties are saying that the agreement itself doesn't matter, but the intentions behind it. And to understand what the intentions are, we can look at past experiences with at least 20 agreements, just like the one that was brokered today by China. They led to nothing. And also the sources are adding that just the fact that virtually all the different factions have voiced reservations regarding the final text of this summit, of this agreement. That just shows the probability of it actually coming into effect, of a unity government shared by Hamas and Fatah ruling Gaza the day after. It's not in the cards currently. At the end of the day, what we're seeing is also Fatah, also Hamas, also Chinese. This is a move for optics, nothing more.
As you say, optics. Now, even as Palestinian factions seek an elusive unity, Israel is carrying on its battle against Palestinian terror cells in the West Bank. An Israeli drone strike today killed 2 senior terror operatives in Tulkarem, and clashes erupted afterwards between the IDF and Palestinian gunmen. This is the IDF has carried out more than 50 airstrikes in the West Bank since October 7th. And Masigal and Alex Schloss have more in this report.
Scenes of destruction following an Israeli drone strike in the West Bank city of Tulkarem. The strike targeted 2 senior terror operatives, Ashraf Nafeh, the head of Hamas in Tulkarem, and Mohammed Abu Abdo, the head of Fatah-linked Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in the same city. The IDF says that Nafeh was responsible for preparing and planting explosive devices to be detonated against Israeli troops, as well as being involved in recruiting Hamas operatives. While Abu Abdo was involved in shooting attacks and raising money for the terror activities in Tulkarem. The joint counter-terror operation carried out by the IDF, Shin Bet, and Israeli border police used a ruse to draw the terrorists to an open area where they could be targeted by the strike. Violence erupted on the streets of Tulkarem during the raid. Palestinian media reports that 5 were killed in the clashes. Videos circulating on social media show one of the operatives killed was an armed female combatant dressed as a medic. The IDF shot several gunmen in the early morning gunfight and destroyed explosive devices planted under roads in the city. The IDF says that it has carried out more than 50 airstrikes in the West Bank over the course of the last 9 months, as violence in the region has risen steadily since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war.
And let's turn now to Yemen, where the fires continue to burn in the port of Hodeidah following the Israeli airstrike there, retaliating against the Houthis for their deadly drone strike on Tel Aviv last week. Now, the Iran-backed Houthis continue to make threats against Israel, promising fresh waves of surprise drone strikes. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has the details.
Yemen's Hodeidah port continues to burn 72 hours after Israel's retaliatory strike on Houthi-controlled sites. And the Iranian-backed terror group is vowing to expand their strikes against Israel.
Israel's aggression will not benefit it at all. It will not provide it with deterrence, nor will it prevent the operations carried out by the Houthi army in support of the Palestinian people. Nor will it prevent us from continuing the 5th stage of escalation against the Israeli enemy.
This so-called 5th stage of the Houthis' operation will reportedly include surprise strikes on areas that have not yet been targeted. The Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper, which is affiliated with Hezbollah, claims the Houthis are planning to target Israel's offshore gas fields and energy sites. Meanwhile, the Houthis published footage of what they claim is the launch of their new Yafa drone, which penetrated Israel's air defenses and killed an Israeli in Tel Aviv on Friday. The show of force comes as the Houthis announced reaching an agreement with the Saudis aimed at de-escalating tensions. Earlier this month, the Houthis' leader threatened to strike the Saudis, accusing Riyadh of acting in the service of America and Israel.
The Saudis must realize that we can never remain silent regarding such reckless, foolish, and stupid steps. They must stop this wrong path, or else we will respond everything in equal measure. The Riyadh airport with the Sana'a airport, banks with banks, and ports with port.
According to the agreement, the sides agreed on a series of financial steps, including canceling steps against Yemeni banks, proving once again that the Houthis get what they want, through threats of violence.
Ariel, I think it's safe to say until last weekend's attack in Tel Aviv that Israel, certainly the public, maybe security authorities, kind of underestimated the threat posed by the Houthis and their capabilities. And when they say they're threatening those oil rigs, gas rigs that are very important to Israel now right off the Mediterranean coast, that's a threat that has to be taken seriously moving forward.
Indeed, Kalev. First of all, we have to remember that Friday's deadly attack was successful on the part of the Houthis due to a human error in the IDF, meaning for months they've been trying to penetrate. They haven't succeeded. They didn't succeed until Friday, and they needed a human error in order to finally make it
But a human
through.
error because of their strategy of attacking Israel from the west, from the Mediterranean.
Again, that's not to say that they don't pose a threat,
right.
But it's to say that it was a threat that the IDF was willing to absorb, given that Israel is currently engaged in multiple fronts. And I think the lesson learned in Israel following October 7th is that if you ignore threats that grow, whether they're on your border or 2,000 miles away, with the clear intent of targeting Israeli civilians and military personnel, one needs to act against those threats lest they become so grand that you can't put them away. At the end of the day, what we're looking at here is an increasingly emboldened Iranian proxy that has more and more support. The former Houthi spokesperson that we interviewed this week said that the Israeli strike on Hodeidah will not deter the Houthis, but rather embolden them, and saying that what will stop the Houthis striking is you need a radical solution, and that is not, it's not enough to have a Western coalition. You need a Western and Arab coalition like there was between 2015 until 2018. But as we saw at the end of that report, the key element for that Arab coalition, the Saudis, they're extremely deterred by the Houthis, and once again are opting for a diplomatic solution amid Houthi threats to resume strikes, very devastating strikes that we saw on Saudi oil interests. Right. Aramco back in 2021, they also targeted the Emiratis and Emirati soil. And so we see Arab actors take Houthi threats at face value, and Israel currently now trying to show that it is willing to respond. The question is, will indeed the Houthis make good on their promises, as Hezbollah did back in the day during the maritime negotiations when Nasrallah vowed to send drones at the Karish rig. He did send one, and the question is...
Right, more of a symbolic threat. I'm also pretty certain that Prime Minister Netanyahu will include this threat in his speech tomorrow, pointing to Iran, of course, as the body behind the Houthis, and perhaps reference the attack on Tel Aviv, and make the calls of you're speaking about for a coalition. Of course, the question is if that message is going to be heard in Washington, Washington that is so distracted by all that's going on there. So we'll have to wait and see about that. Now, early in the program, we spoke about the hostage families. We heard from one of the parents of a hostage, but we need to keep in mind that Arab families in Israel are also dealing with the nightmare of having their loved ones murdered on October 7th and also being among the hostages still being held in Gaza. Now, Hamas terrorists did not discriminate on that fateful day between Jew and Arab. An interfaith nonprofit group and the Hostage Family Forum has organized a special discussion between Jewish and Arab families in the southern Israeli city of Rahat. Our Emily Francis went down there and filed this report.
Many don't realize that Arab Israelis were not only killed by Hamas terrorists during the October 7th massacre.
She was driving her car pregnant with her husband and an 8-month-old baby. And she was wearing hijab, an Islamic scarf, and they were speaking Arabic. And 8 Hamas attackers came and shot her. And her husband, I just spoke to him, they let 9 kids without their mother. And he said they didn't care that she was not Jewish, that she was Muslim.
But also, as many as 6 are still being held hostage in the tunnels of Gaza.
I'm the brother of Yosef and uncle of Hamza, who were kidnapped on October 7th, together with 2 young children who came back from captivity.
Ali Zayadneh is the head of a large and well-known and respected Bedouin family from Rahat, Israel's largest Arab Israeli city. A place where, since the beginning of the war, we saw Jews and Arabs volunteering together to bring emergency aid and supplies to Bedouin families living on the fringe.
We're constantly going to many places around the world and telling our story. We're sick of telling the same story. I hope this will be the last meeting.
He and other families got a chance to express their shared pain and concerns at a special meeting with some of the family members of the over 100 Jewish hostages.
We received a horrible gift on October 7th. It's an opportunity to get things done. We don't have a choice. We must find a way to live together.
People are killing each other within the Arab community. You hear about it every morning.
People have turned into numbers.
On October 7th, we became one family, suffering from the same fate. I'm the head of the Unity Desk of the Hostage Family Forum. Unity is not just a word. When I speak of unity, it's not just the shared fate. The power of unity has the potential to be much stronger.
Shai Wankert, father of 22-year-old hostage Omer Wankert, says they've barely gotten breadcrumbs of information from one of the released hostages.
After 54 days, Liam Or went outside. He was with Omer 24/7, also with 4 Thai guys in a very deep tunnel because they didn't hear the bombs. No electricity, lack of food, no toilet, no running water, no nothing. Very difficult situation. As you know, Omer has a colitis disease, and we are very worried about this situation. We feel that he has maybe a grenade inside his stomach because it can blow any minute.
Bashir al-Ziadneh has been an advocate working with the Family Forum and personally has family members in Gaza captivity.
Nobody seems to talk about them, and that's why it's very important for me to come here and to speak about them and to stop them from being transparent to all people.
Is there a fear to be more involved with the forum?
Yeah, there is a fear from Hamas that if they are more involved, then Hamas might do harm things to their relatives who are being held as hostages in Gaza.
Enough. It's an embarrassment to Israel and a shame for the country. The government has abandoned these human beings during negotiations to strike a deal. These are human beings.
They try to go to Al Jazeera, the Arab channel of Al Jazeera. They won't interview no one of the hostage family. Not us, not the Bedouin. They want to know that they are suffering because they are citizens of Israel. And they are suffering exactly as I am suffering.
The families are still holding on to hope that a hostage deal will happen so their loved ones could come home and the hostages and their families and the entire country would be able to finally exhale.
We feel there is a deal now. We hope there is a deal now. It's still can be a long time. It's not today, tomorrow.
Do you think there could be a better future between Jews and Arabs in Israel?
Yes, for sure. I think so. I think we need to get rid of the fanatics from the Arabs and fanatics from the Jews, and we can have a better future together. There's more people who want to live together than there is people who don't want to live together.
In Rahat, Emily Francis, I-24 News.
And let's hope that the suffering of those families ends as soon as possible. Now, the Paris Summer Olympics kick off on Friday amid unprecedented security arrangements by French authorities. Now, along with the usual challenges, there is heightened concern over disruptions by pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protesters, as well as terror attacks directed against Israeli athletes. And Israel's National Security Council today issued a travel warning to Israeli tourists planning to attend the Olympics in Paris, saying they could be targets of global jihadist and Iran-backed terror organizations. Yana Suradana and Lynn Plachmai have more in this report.
The 2024 Paris Olympic kickoff on Friday. A record number of security forces are being deployed on the streets of the French capital to secure the more than 10,000 Olympic athletes and the millions of visitors. Just a year ago, France proclaimed that Paris would be the safest place in the world during their opening ceremony. But with tensions rampant in the shadow of the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, and after several attacks by Israeli security forces in recent days, the fear is definitely there.
Threats happen to athletes on a regular basis. We do understand, obviously, that Israeli athletes are receiving more. There are a number of safeguarding practices that we put in place straight away.
Unlike the previous Olympics in London or Rio de Janeiro, many of the events and competitions at this Olympiad will be held in the heart of the city, including the unprecedented opening event, which will take place along the Seine River and requires complex security and a strict inspection of all the boats. Paris, sadly, is familiar with terrorist attacks. Security forces are not just preparing for possible terrorist attacks by individuals, riots and protests. There are also the chances of cyber attacks by Russian elements. The strict checks of visitors and citizens for fear of Islamic extremism has blocked the entry of several thousand people into the closed complex around the Seine River. In addition to the 45,000 policemen who will secure the opening events, a military camp has been set up in the capital, the largest in France since the Second World War, which can provide and respond to anything happening to the entire city if necessary. The skies above Paris will be a no-fly zone during Friday's opening ceremony, scrutinized by drones and helicopters. And citizens and visitors will be monitored using artificial intelligence while the games go on. One of the obvious concerns is, of course, the threats to Israeli athletes and visitors. On Saturday, before the opening of the Games, another demonstration was held in Paris, calling for Israel to be prevented from participating in the Olympics.
The Israeli athletes' participation in the Olympics is very shocking, especially when we know what's been happening for 8 months in Gaza. There are dozens and dozens of young Palestinian athletes who will never be able to participate in the Olympic Games, and they can say thank you to Israel for that.
With so many of the world leaders are expected to be guests at the opening ceremony, it's safe to assume that the attempted assassination of Donald Trump last week has given authorities something else to worry about.
Now, despite all that's going on, the Jerusalem Film Festival has kicked off in the capital. Unfortunately, the situation here has kind of hindered Israeli film production in this country, but another country is offering itself as perhaps a location for Israeli filmmakers. India Naftali went to the Jerusalem Film Festival to check it out.
This year at the Jerusalem Film Festival, 2 Indian films are lighting up the big screen. This collaboration highlights the growing cultural exchange between India and Israel. The Embassy of India in Tel Aviv, in association with the Jerusalem Film Festival, hosted a special session on incentives for filming in India at the Jerusalem Cinematheque. Over 100 film enthusiasts, including members of the Israeli film fraternity, the Indian community, and media representatives attended the event. The program began with brief remarks by Deputy Ambassador of India, Mr. Rajiv Bodwade, who highlighted the lucrative incentives the Indian government is providing to Israeli filmmakers who choose to film in India.
The government of India is keen to promote foreign film producers to come and shoot in India, carry out their production, post-production activities in India. The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has released quite attractive incentive packages whereby up to 40% of the production costs in India can be reimbursed with a cap of $3.6 million. Today, we'll be seeing All We Imagine as Light at the Jerusalem Film Festival, which is one of the premier film festivals of Israel. I'm happy to tell you that the show is houseful. That tells you the kind of enthusiasm and the curiosity that the people of Israel have towards this film.
And in a landmark collaboration, Israeli film producer Dan Waldman shared exciting news about the first official Indian-Israeli co-production.
With us here is Amir Jadalia, my co-producer. Together, we, with the producer and film director, Indian film director, Manju Bora, who lives in Guwahati, Assam, we decided to co-produce an official Israeli-Indian co-production. There's something else which is important, which has to do with something that I found in India, that when we were there, the crew, the people that we met, they made us feel at home. They made us feel that we are a family.
This event marks a significant milestone in the partnership between India and Israel, promising a bright future for cross-cultural film production. Reporting from Jerusalem, thanks for joining us.
Now, earlier in the broadcast, we did discuss the fact that it appeared to be an open question whether Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be meeting in the end with former President Donald Trump during this visit of his to the U.S. And just in the last few minutes, Ariel, we have got an update from it.
An update that, like everything that comes out of, Trump on Truth, you have to take with a grain of salt because apparently already it's not entirely accurate. According to his latest post, looking forward to welcoming Bibi Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida tomorrow. If this is indeed tomorrow, this would be following the Netanyahu's speech, which is set for 2 p.m. Local time, so he would be traveling afterwards. But according to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, there was an error. Apparently, the meeting is going to take place on Friday, not tomorrow.
You mean an error in Donald Trump's announcement saying it was tomorrow, but it actually is going to be Friday?
Exactly.
Which would make more sense.
However, the current post still has tomorrow, so we're trying to make make a order in the facts. At the end of the day, we are seeing that this meeting is expected to happen, whether it'll be before the speech or after tomorrow or Friday. That's not clear, but indeed, I think for Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's a very important
100%.
meeting. And in the post, Trump said, during my first term, we had peace and stability in the region, even signing the historic Abraham Accords, and we will have it again. So clearly, they have a lot to talk about.
All right. Hard to imagine the Prime Minister Netanyahu would be in the U.S. and not meet with Donald Trump at this time. Ariel Oseron, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us this evening on The Rundown. You continue to follow us on our website. We'll be back tomorrow. If you can, catch The Rundown.